Welcome to Ask Angela, relationship advice for love after trauma. I'm Angela Amias, here to help you navigate intimate relationships as I answer real questions about love, loss, and everything in between. This is where we untangle old patterns that keep us stuck and discover new possibilities for connection. Relationships after trauma need a different kind of wisdom, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey there. Some of the most frustrating kinds of conflicts in intimate relationships are the ones that don't come from genuine disagreements or differences between partners. Rather, they're the result of misunderstandings that escalate and spiral out of control before we even have a chance to catch up. In this episode, I'll be answering a question from Joe, who writes, "My partner and I seem to be stuck in a cycle where we have huge fights that turn out to be because of a misunderstanding. But we don't figure that out until we've already blown up at each other or spoiled an entire afternoon." Here's a recent example. My partner said that he didn't think it was a good idea to take time off of work to go on a trip we'd planned to Florida. I immediately felt hurt and upset because I've been working overtime for several months now. And the only thing that's been keeping me going is thinking about being on a beach with a drink in one hand and a book in the other. Unfortunately, because I felt hurt, I reacted to my husband by saying, "Fine, I'll just go to Florida without you." Then he felt really hurt because it turned out he was going to suggest a trip to Europe instead, because I've always wanted to go to France. But by the time I learned all that, we were barely speaking to each other, and we both felt so hurt by what was said in the fight that realizing it was all a misunderstanding didn't help. How do we break this cycle? Dear Joe, one of the most amazing things about the human mind is how much information we can take in from the outside world and how quickly we can come to conclusions about that information. Even without trying, we can assess a situation in the blink of an eye. And in the next blink of an eye, before we even realize it, we are already responding to the situation. This is how we're able to go from cruising down the road singing along to our favorite song to slamming on the brakes when a dog darts out into the street. We're capable of responding so fast to emergencies that it's really like we're not thinking at all. Some kind of autopilot kicks in and we react instantaneously to avert catastrophe. But as your letter highlights so poignantly, this ability to react with lightning speed can create challenges in our intimate relationships. Whereas it might only take a second to recognize that the shape rapidly approaching the road is a dog and to put on the brakes, it's a lot more complicated to figure out what your husband is really trying to say when he suggests that you two postpone your trip to Florida. The challenge is that our mind comes to conclusions about meaning so quickly. And if this meaning isn't something we like, it's followed by a surge of emotions about what's been said that makes it difficult to think clearly or do anything other than react by expressing those emotions. What you're describing about jumping to conclusions about what your partner has said is what psychologists often call mind reading. In essence, you assume you know what your husband is thinking and where he's coming from when he suggests postponing your vacation. And based on those assumptions, you have all kinds of strong feelings: hurt, frustration, disappointment. And those feelings probably lead to thinking things like, "He doesn't really care about me," or "He always does this," or "He'd rather sit around playing video games than go on vacation with me." And once you've had those kinds of thoughts, then maybe you feel entirely justified in blasting your selfish jerk of a husband who doesn't care at all about how hard you've been working. When we're flooded by strong emotions, our ability to think and reflect temporarily goes offline. We react without pausing to consider what more information we might need to come to conclusions about the situation we're in. And to make this worse, our strong emotions convince us that our reaction to the other person is entirely justified. As you've already recognized, this is a recipe for hurtful, even explosive conflicts that aren't grounded in any real disagreement between you and your partner. So, if this is the case and the mind reading and emotional response happen in the blink of an eye, how do you start to interrupt this pattern? While ideally you might like to not have this strong emotional response in the first place, in my experience, this can be a difficult place to intervene in the cycle for many people. To some degree, how quickly we react and how strongly we react can be fairly innate. So while some individuals are blessed with a stoic temperament that allows them to respond slowly, others are not so blessed. And for those of us who tend to be more reactive, and I put myself in this category, it can be more effective to focus on what comes after your initial emotional reaction. Here's what this looks like in practice. You've come home from a long day of work, counting down the days until your trip to Florida, and your husband says something like, "Do you have a minute?" And without even pausing, he continues, "I don't think we should go to Florida. It doesn't seem like the best use of our limited vacation time." And before he can say any more, you have all the feelings: hurt, anger, disappointment, maybe feeling unappreciated, etc. You have all these feelings, and everything in you wants to lay into your selfish, uncaring husband and maybe cause him to feel some of the hurt that you're feeling. But this is the exact moment when you have an opportunity to break the cycle. Because there is a moment here, even though it's really small and easy to overlook. This is the moment when you can choose to pause and take a deep breath. This is the moment when you can recognize that you actually need more information because you're actively engaged in mind reading and assuming you know where your husband is coming from with his request. So instead of unleashing all that emotion in your husband's direction, you need to contain it, at least long enough to figure out whether it's justified by the situation. Developing the ability to contain your emotions rather than immediately spill them out into your environment takes practice. Emotional containment is a skill that's important for relationships because it's the lack of emotional containment that ends up fueling hurtful arguments and destructive patterns for couples. As with all relationship skills, it's not fair to expect that you're going to develop this one overnight. Perhaps the first time you try to contain your feelings, you're only able to do it for 60 seconds before you launch into your familiar pattern with your husband. This is still progress because in those 30 seconds, you're already starting to break the habit of mind reading. When it comes to changing relationship patterns and developing new skills for partnership, progress isn't linear, and perfection isn't necessary or even realistic. When you're able to contain your feelings, even briefly, and you recognize that you don't actually have enough information to come to conclusions about your husband's thoughts, feelings, or motivations, then it's easy to see that what's needed here is more information. In other words, it's time to ask some questions. But how you ask questions matters a lot. There's a huge difference between asking neutral questions like, "Can you tell me more about what you're thinking?" Or, "I don't understand. Where is this coming from?" And questions that are laden with hostility like, "Do you have any idea how hurtful this is to me?" Or even, help me understand, why would you even suggest canceling the trip? The emotional charge you're already feeling, paired with the ingrained communication habits in your relationship, will have you leaning toward asking a question that's already based in assumptions that may be completely wrong. This is why giving yourself a moment to pause and collect yourself before responding will be so important. Because thinking on your feet in these kinds of moments is tricky, it's absolutely okay to use a stock question that's completely neutral. I like the question, "Can you tell me more?" because it's short, easy to remember, and completely neutral. Inviting your partner to share more information has the advantage of not only giving you the necessary context to understand where your partner is coming from, it also gives you the chance to continue to focus on containing your emotions as you listen. In other episodes, I've talked a lot about the value of curiosity in relationships in terms of deepening intimacy and improving communication. One way to think about the habit of mind reading is that it's a complete absence of curiosity, because you're assuming you already know everything there is to know about your partner's thoughts, feelings, motivations, even though, as you've discovered, you actually don't. If you want to understand more about how to use curiosity to improve communication in your relationship, I'd recommend listening to Season 1, Episodes 15 and 17. Now, let's say you're able to ask a question like, "Can you tell me more about this?" And your husband starts to share more about his thought process and where he's coming from. While this sounds straightforward, I want to acknowledge that there are still a few potential pitfalls here that I want to point out so you can hopefully avoid them. First, you two have a well-established pattern of fighting, which means that your husband may very well read all the emotions on your face and in your voice and react with his own emotions, even though you're trying to do something different here. Secondly, when our emotions are heightened, it's very, very difficult to hear our partner accurately, even when we're trying. So the risk of jumping to conclusions and mind reading doesn't end just because you've asked a neutral question like, "Can you tell me more?" The best chance of success is to continue to slow down the process of communication. Apart from asking neutral questions, you can slow everything down by attempting to summarize and reflect what you've heard from your partner. So this might sound like, "What I hear you saying is that you don't think we should use our vacation time to go to Florida." Or if you're like many of us, you might unintentionally slip your own assumptions into your attempt to summarize and reflect. And this might sound more like, "What I hear you saying is you don't think it's worth it to use our vacation time to go to Florida." The good thing is that even if you get it wrong, this attempt at reflecting back what you're hearing gives your partner a chance to clarify, correct, or add more information to help you to come to a shared understanding of what's being communicated. Because this is a well-established pattern in your relationship, it's likely that both of you need to develop these skills of pausing, slowing down, containing your own emotions, bringing curiosity to the conversation, and using reflective communication techniques to correct misunderstandings and assumptions. The good news is that you have a well-meaning partner who's thinking about your happiness, even while you're both grappling with a destructive pattern in your marriage. It's commonly the case that reactivity that turns into conflict is an unhealthy expression of sincere care and value for the relationship. Now that you understand more about the roots of this pattern, you have a better way to express this care by investing your energy into building better communication. So here's my wish for you, Joe. May you remember, even in moments of tension, hurt, and conflict, that you and your partner are on the same side. You are two people with strong feelings who care deeply for each other and who are still learning how to make room for emotion without letting it take over, and how to show up for each other and your relationship by developing the skills to express care through love, support, and listening. And on that note, listener, thanks for tuning in. That's it for this episode of Ask Angela, Relationship Advice for Love After Trauma. This podcast is really built around your questions. So if you've got a relationship situation that you'd like me to talk about, head on over to askangelapodcast.com to submit your question. I'll be back soon with another episode. And until then, lots of love.